Welcome to Raising Special Needs Kids. Real conversations, real hope, and real stories for families walking the special needs journey. Our host is Monica Schmelter, sister to a brother with Down syndrome, and we're here to remind you, you're not alone.
Hi, I'm Monica, and this is the Raising Special Needs Kids podcast. So glad that you could join us. My guest today is Lynn Cable. Lynn, welcome. So glad to have you on the podcast today.
Such a pleasure to be here, Monica. Thank you.
You know, Lynn, as I shared with you a little bit before we started filming and with you who listen regularly, we started this podcast in honor of my late brother, Donnie Phillips, who had Down syndrome and was just one of the funnest, kindest people ever. And so this podcast is in his memory, and the idea is to create community and connection amongst special needs families and siblings and all of that. So Lynn, tell us about your special needs family.
Wow, that's a great question with a long answer, so I'll get started.
All right.
My sister Anne Marie was born in 1958. She was the first of 5 children. When she was born, the doctor said first she won't live, and then second to put her away and forget about her. So dreadful, but thinking about the times in the late 50s, early 60s, they didn't have the medical means and ways to help families with children that were born like this. So my parents didn't, Catholic family that said, no, this is what we're charged with. This is what we're taking. And she spent the first 2 months of her life in the hospital. She was diagnosed with microcephaly, dwarfism. She had anomalies, fingers and toes, and she had a very underdeveloped brain, so they couldn't predict what her cognitive abilities would be. So 2 months later, she came home at just over 3 pounds because the hospital couldn't do anything else for her. She became the first of 5 children, like I mentioned, and we knew life as no other. I mean, this was our life. This is what we did. Annie was our person. Annie grew up to be a very functioning child, adolescent, and then young adult before she passed away. She could dress herself and feed herself and all the things, but she still needed total care and life skills care. Annie was nonverbal. Of course, the doctor said she wouldn't live till she was 5. She passed 5, then 10, and they kept giving these milestones towards, what she could or couldn't be, which fortunately my parents defied that advice and I guess logic at the time and said, no, this is our Annie. So 4 children after Annie, family that we were living in poverty. We had an outstanding extended family with lots of support to provide for my family. We had the nuns in the Catholic Church who were great providers for us. And so it just kind of worked out for a while. As my 3 brothers and myself got a little older into childhood ourselves, Annie became quite a struggle. She had some volatile behaviors. She was nonverbal. She couldn't, she had no functional communication. So we didn't know what she wanted or when she wanted it without a tantrum that precluded that. So now doing what I do in special education, I know that was the antecedent for the behavior was the lack of functional communication. So my parents made a really hard decision with the advice of the doctor to put her in an institution. And I think that might have been mid to late 60s. And the institution was called Ladd School. Originally called the School for the Feeble-Minded, but had since progressed to be named after Dr. Ladd himself. So Annie would go Monday through Friday. We would pick her up as a family on Fridays, bring her home, bring her back Sunday evening. As a small child myself, 7 or 8 or 9 even, there were some atrocities at this institution. But again, in that day and age, that was acceptable for the treatment of people with disabilities. In fact, they were called handicapped back then, right?
Yes.
Or mentally retarded or,
Right.
other aversives.
So those that are listening, and those that are watching, it was harder years ago. Not that it ever got easy, but your family was loving Annie, doing everything that you could. There became a time when you just couldn't do the full-time care, but you went and got her every weekend. So
Every
what
weekend.
was next for Annie?
So she was in this lad school for, I think, maybe 7 or 8 years. It's a long time ago, so it's testing my memory.
Sure, of course.
And then my parents brought her home full time. The siblings were older, well established in our schooling and all of the things. And so Annie came back full time. And that's when I became her biggest advocate. I went to the meetings with my mom. I went to, you know, our community was so great up in Newport, Rhode Island, with this population of people with disabilities. So things came around. Now, IDEA, originally Education for All Handicapped Children Act, was passed in 1975. So Annie was 17 before she got any of the benefit of public schooling or supports. In our town in Newport, we had a man called James Maha, and he was the groundbreaker in our community for establishing a center for children with disabilities, his own daughter being one. So we hopped on his coattails. He was an amazing man that really supported Annie and others like Annie. And so she did have a place to fit in at a younger age. Was accepted. And there's this concept about in search of sameness. We all seek out and surround ourselves with people with similarities. And so that became a blessing for Annie. She was with people like her, and she had a place to fit in. So fast forward, Monica, 50 years, now called Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. And I'm glad that we're some ahead, but we're not too far ahead. I know parents still have maybe not the medical struggles that I lived through, my mom lived through, but we still have this bridge to figure out how do we serve and promote and make our Annies of the world all they can be. Right.
Yes.
So that drives me now. Annie is my motivator. She's the light of my life. I don't go a day without thinking about her. And she now drives the work that I do as a parent advocate. So going back in time again, my mom didn't have an advocate. She didn't have support system in the public sector. She sat and was told what they would work on with Annie, what they would do with Annie. All you did was accept it because now there's a place for Annie, right? So I do remember going through her IEPs as a young adult and trying to figure out what were they telling my mom. My mom was always emotional, but my mom carried a strength that all moms with children with disabilities carry. And where that comes from, it's baffling. It must be, a divine intervention somewhere that gives these parents the strengths. In a working class family, my dad wasn't the person involved at the table in the meetings, right? And that's still common today. The dads don't play as big a role, but they do play a role. And it excites me. Oh, Monica, it excites me to see moms and dads at the table now and the investment in their children and their voice for their children.
Yes. And I think for me, just hearing you, Lynn, it's exciting for me. Your sister Annie was born before my brother, but even being born in 72 and finding out that my parents had to advocate for everything because my parents, like yours, were said, he's not going to live long, put him in an institution, having a child. They called it mongoloid then.
Yes, they did.
We say Downs now, but you don't want a mongoloid. All of those things. But to my parents' credit, they said he's ours. We're going to take him home and love him. But I remember, Lynn, like what you're describing, just watching my mom's and my dad's sadness after going to those educational meetings where people say, this is the placement, here's what happens. And my dad went to all of those meetings, and I'm grateful. He made time.
Sure.
Like your family, working class family, not like we had like lots of money, but doing the best that we could and just fighting or feeling like we had to fight for everything for our brother. That's a hard road. And when I think about your Annie and how she's the guiding force in your work in special ed now. That's one of the things about siblings of special needs families is the character, the compassion that it can work in the other children in the home like it has for you.
Correct. Couldn't agree more. It wasn't easy, and it's not easy for the families I work with now that have children with disabilities and then the siblings. And I try to give some guidance and some hope. But that's what we need to lean into is our hope. And I heard an amazing speaker somewhere in my career, and it was a mom of a child with autism. And when asked what advice would she give to educators, she said she begged educators to never say you're in denial to a parent. She said, I'm not in denial. I've never been in denial. I've always been in hope. In hope
Amen.
that my child can prosper, in hope that my child can have friendships and succeed to the best of their ability, in hope that there's a place in the world for them. So that was a game changer. That changed my style of leadership. It changed my perception as a sibling. I bring that into meetings all the time now that, these parents need hope.
Yes.
And we as educators and society have to give them a pathway for that hope.
Yes.
Pretty profound statement that made an impact on my life. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so true, because I can remember social workers, Lynn, coming to our house when my brother was little, like 2 and 3 years old. And one of the social workers, and I know she was well-meaning, but she would tell my mom, I'm your reality tester. Here's the reality here. This is what he can't do. This is what he can do. And I remember when she would leave, my mom would cry. And I detested that social worker because, I was like maybe 11 or 12 at the time. I didn't understand other than how I perceived it as all these people are being mean to this really happy child that brought us so much joy. And like that was my brother. So I learned to fiercely protect him and had such compassion for my parents who they wanted just what you said, hope.
Yeah.
Hope that he could do some things. Hope that there was a place that he could fit in. Hope that he could do well. Not just wanting to sit around and agree with all the naysayers, but wanting to hope and push and pray and doing the best we can to give him opportunities just like we do for the other children in our families.
Right. Neurotypical versus neurodiverse.
Yes.
And I think back about the people you mentioned that the social worker for you was a unpleasant experience, and it was the same, and it's unfortunately some cases still is, but we pushed through that as a family. I don't remember thinking any other way that she was part of our family. We were out in public. Back in the 60s, 70s, children with disabilities weren't really promoted to be in the public eye. We'd sit at a restaurant or have coffee together, and Annie always knew when somebody was staring at her. And I cherished it. I loved it because she would point at them. And I would say, she would call it out. And I would say, I know, Annie, they're staring at you. They don't understand. So I remember those moments in time in public, and, it just, I don't know. It got me where I am today. I went from, a sister to college degrees, and then classroom teacher, and from children as young as 3 to 15, and then worked my way into being director of special education, which really brought me full circle. And my staff at the time, my teachers, my teacher aides, even the parents I worked with knew that my guiding question, my guiding point of leadership was, what would I want from my Annie? Right? If it was good enough for my sister, then it's good enough for you to do and teach and practice on. So, I love that it influenced my life in such a way that I never aspired to be anything but a special ed teacher. And now retired from being a director in Lebanon, I'm now helping moms, and my mission is to fill that gap that my mom didn't get the help. The help wasn't available to my mom, and to bring hope to those families now. So that's my newest and latest. Yeah.
And that's such a needed and worthwhile mission. And that's a part of the reason for this podcast, Raising Special Needs Kids podcast, because parents need people to come alongside of them, to advocate. I look at my mom and dad when there just wasn't a lot of advocacy for them. It wasn't available. There wasn't either, there wasn't a community. There weren't groups of families that get together just to encourage, to cheer one another on,
Yes.
to pray one another. It's isolating, because the family is different than other families, but it's still a family, and the family still has value, and that God worked in your life, Lynn, to bring you into such a field where you can make a difference, and to have that personal touch of, is this good enough for Annie? Just what a blessing for you, such a rewarding career, and what a gift to these families who all they want is the same thing that most other families want. You
Correct.
want the best for your children. You want
Correct.
opportunities for your children. You want your kids to do as much as they can do, and to do it as well as they can. And so this has been your lifelong work. And what would you say, to a mom or maybe to a dad who is watching or listening to this? How do you get into that stream of hope instead of being crushed by the circumstances and the stares, which my brother did not like people staring at him, and who would? Right? But how do you get into that stream of hope? What would you suggest?
That's a very complex question.
Yeah.
Let me try to break that down a little. So, parents walk into this special education stuff at a very young age, birth to 3, sometimes birth to 3, TEIS, early intervening services, and then certainly into the school system by the age of 3. And it's overwhelming. They're sitting at this table with professionals saying this, that, and the other thing. And as a parent, many times they're thinking the opposite. And you get this psychoeducational report, and it says they're at a 3-month level, or a very low developmental level. And it's hard. It's hard. And I challenge parents to question at these meetings, to bring your questions, write your comments down, and bring it in writing first, and challenge the questions. Ask the why behind the statement. When I'm working shoulder to shoulder with parents, because of my career, I know what probing or clarifying questions to ask. So I try to model that for families, and all families don't need an advocate, but they need their own strength to say, I need to research my child's disorder or diagnosis. I need to research best practices, which certainly means staying away from those chat rooms and going down the rabbit hole with the negativity. And I need to come well-informed, because the parents are the expert of their child.
Yes.
Hands down,
Yes.
No question. So bringing that power within themselves to these meetings at whatever level their understanding is. I will sidewalk a little bit and say that, most of public education and special educators and school psychologists are good people. They want to do the right thing, but they're never in the shoes of the parents, right? So because you and I, Monica, walked alongside our parents' shoes, and we're in them sometimes as caretakers, we were able to understand the empathy needed
Yes.
at large. So that's my voice, is just to say that they're not in your shoes. Keep going. You've got this. Review the paperwork. Yes. Ask the questions.
Yeah, and I think to look at it also, for example, just in the physical realm, if a person goes to the doctor, right, sometimes they want to prepare you by giving you, these are the worst things that could happen. Right. And so when you look at professionals in special education, it doesn't mean that they don't have compassion or they don't care. There is probably a sense of responsibility of, these are some things that could happen, or here are some limitations. But like you said, to not give up on what you know. I know, for example, Lynn, that many times people could not understand what my brother was saying because of his speech impediment. However, and I was like his second mom, and my mom will tell you that. Like I just sort
Same,
of,
same,
it's like I'm his second mom here. I understood every single thing that he was saying. But
same.
that's because I was with him all the time.
Right.
And I would say, no, he does know the answer to that. And people would be like, no, that's not what he said. But I never let it go. Like I knew that that's what he said. And so I advocated for that. No one
Awesome.
is going to care about our children more than us, right?
True.
And if we don't advocate, the professionals just have that glance, like just that little glance into this window. They don't know about the person's entire personality and their heart and their determination. And so we stand for that. And I think part of what I wanted to do in this podcast is to encourage families to do that. Like, don't back down just because someone has more degrees. I always advocate being respectful to everybody. That's just
Sure.
and to be kind to everybody. But at the same time, don't be a doormat. If you know your kid can do something, maybe it needs to be a written test, or maybe it needs to be an oral test, or just try to advocate for the best that you can.
Correct.
In the system, right? So that your child can get the education, the training, or whatever that might look like.
Absolutely. We put our kids, and I say our kids, our special friends, we put them into a
Yes.
box of this standardization of assessing. And you have to know it this way because it's the way I measure it. And so, parents, please, if you're listening, reach out, say, no, there are better ways to measure. Example this week, a child did poorly on a spelling test. Well, he did poorly on the spelling test because he couldn't hold the pencil.
Yeah.
So why aren't we giving him a spelling test with letter tiles or magnetic letters, right? We have to get out of this box called I teach, you learn, and this is how we measure.
Yes. And
And
that's the part. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, and that's something that parents have to understand. That comes under the accommodations section in an IEP, that question that, why can't he tell you how to spell it? The word he tells me at home. That's how we practice. So there are alternatives to measuring children with disabilities. And I think our public schools and our mindsets have to change alongside that.
Exactly. I think when I think about my late brother, he did a lot of things that people didn't ever think that he could do. He
Same.
was able to read at a very early elementary level, but nonetheless, he could read, and he
He could read.
enjoyed reading what he could read. He was able to write a few things, like his name and address. He was
Sure.
able to do some really basic things. I remember, like, as a 15-year-old, I thought, Lynn, that I could teach my brother simple math. And I thought that I could teach him how to count change back, which no one does that anymore. It's all computerized. But,
Sure.
back in the day, you counted change back. So I found out that I was really incorrect with that I worked hard and hard and hard.
Sure.
But he wasn't able to retain or do that. So when I bumped into that wall, I realized, okay, there are things that he can't do that normal people, whatever that is, normal people can do. But I didn't let that stop me, because he could still do all these other things. Like,
Sure.
he loved to dance. He could memorize words to songs, and he could sing them. And so I was like, okay, Donnie, we will just do all these fun things. Don't even worry about counting change back.
Sure.
I'll do it for you. And so I think there is that place of acceptance with our children or siblings. Like, okay, there are some differences here than from maybe another person, but not to let that difference or that particular disability count them out in every area.
Absolutely. And holding those high expectations for our kids. Your brother, my sister was not a reader, but she could write the letter A for Anne, so that was her claim to fame. She could write L for Lynn. And she could draw a happy face. And when I was not living close by, she would mail those to me, and it would brighten my day. So now I think that was back in, the 70s. Now I think, well, if the teachers only accepted that she could learn an A and an L, That's all she learned to write. So why can't we expect, if she can make an A, 3 strokes on an A, why can't we teach her additional letters? So back in the day, teachers just were satisfied that that was enough. Today, parents, that's not enough. If your child can learn the word cat, consonant, vowel, consonant, CVC is what we call it, why can't they learn a science word like planet? Right. So carry those high expectations, parents, bring those into the school setting, into your meetings. And whether they learn it or don't, even if we're exposing children to this different vocabulary, bravo. Right. We
Yes.
can't set limits on our kids.
Right. And I think, one of the things that, like, as the big sister to my late brother, you know, there was a lot of teasing that went on sometimes, and a lot of, and of course, none of us want that for our children or our siblings. But one of the things that I stayed really strong with my brother on is keep your head high and your chin up, even when
Love it.
people do it. You can say stop, right? You can
Point at them.
yes. And he didn't point, but he would do this. He would make his eyes real big and like make it like, and I'd be like, that is okay. Because I had someone give us feedback that he shouldn't do that. And I thought, oh, really? Well, how do you think you'd like it if people looked
Correct.
at you and they held the stare a long time? It would make anyone feel uncomfortable.
Sure.
So why wouldn't he be allowed to make his eyes real big and scrunch up his nose? I actually encouraged that. Maybe I shouldn't have, but I did.
No, I think it's great. I think it's fabulous.
It's like, stop it already. We can be kind to people. We can be kind to all people. But I did try the best I could as a big sister, not to pretend that the teasing didn't go on, but to help him be confident enough in him and strong enough in him that didn't make him melt like a puddle that particular day. Is that something good for parents to do?
It is. We wrap our heads around this term called least restrictive environment, and we want our children with disabilities to be educated along non-disabled peers. It's critical, not just for the learning to whatever extent that's going to be, but for that connection to other people. Like we're all one, all having access to this thing called public education. And so step up, people. Let's put our kids together. Fortunately, special education classrooms aren't the last classroom down the end of the last hall anymore. But to your point about your brother, my sister, I couldn't have playmates over because the ignorance in society was that they would catch something, that she was contagious. Mental retardation and physical disabilities was contagious. So yes, I too, as a sibling, like you just mentioned, that inner pain or struggle or angst when people were judging our sister, your brother, it still happens, and it's ignorance. And I think as a community, teachers in their classroom community are the ones to change that. And parents should be pushing for time with non-disabled peers. Even though I mentioned earlier that sense of sameness, there's a time and place for people with disabilities to be together. But in the public school system, you should expect more. You should expect that they get to have lunch with their grade level peers, not at a separate table for special ed kids, right? So those things I think can still need help or assistance, and parents are the ones to do that. Say, no, he's going to sit with his fifth grade helper. Yeah.
Well, and think about, there are, of course, differences. There are differences in normal people, whatever normal people are. There's all of that. I remember a church telling my parents, very sadly, he was less than 12 months old, but people didn't want him in the nursery with the infants. The other mothers were concerned.
Sure.
But to your point, it's not contagious. Then someone even mentioned mannerisms. Well, first of all, under 12 months, you don't have any mannerisms, but hello.
It's called development.
Yeah, it's just be kind, hanging around with somebody who's has some disabilities is not going to make your child disabled. That is just not going to happen. What can happen is that for the other people around them to also develop compassion and strength and just see that
empathy. We need empathy, not sympathy, empathy. Yeah.
And I think, like, for myself as a sibling, and I know for my sister, we would both tell you that we are far more empathic, compassionate people because we had the rich experience of having a brother that had Down syndrome. He taught us more lessons about kindness and generosity and encouragement than anything could have taught us,
Sure.
And we're better people for it. And clearly, Lynn, you are too.
And as are my brothers. I still have two living brothers, and it lights up our conversations when we talk about Annie, and their memories are different and their experiences were different. I was further immersed in it because maybe I was the daughter and that fell on me some. And then, of course, I made a career out of it. So,
Yes.
it looks different for different people. I love that there are support groups for siblings now. There's community resources for that. Parents can ask their teachers or their school systems or someone like myself or yourself to find those agencies that can provide that kind of support.
Yes. Well, I could talk to you all day, but we are out of time, Lynn. But thank you so much for coming and for sharing your family story and for that mission of, is this good enough for Annie? So thank you so much.
Thank you. It's been a privilege.
Thank you for listening to Raising Special Needs Kids, a safe place for honest stories, practical help, and a whole lot of encouragement. We are so glad we're on this journey together, and we will see you next time.